Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Executive Committee meeting of the WMATA Board on November 5th, 2020. Thank you for joining us this morning. First, before we begin, I'd like to ask our Deputy Chief Safety Officer, Greg Kupra, to provide us with our safety contact. Greg?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. November is National Diabetes Month, and this year's focus is on the link between diabetes and cardiovascular disease. Adults with diabetes are nearly twice as likely to die from heart disease or stroke as people without diabetes, as high blood glucose can damage blood vessels and the nerves that control your heart. The positive steps one can take to manage diabetes can also help lower the chances of having heart disease or stroke. These include stop smoking or using tobacco products, managing blood pressure and cholesterol levels, developing or maintaining a healthy lifestyle by being physically active and managing stress, and taking medicines as prescribed by your doctor. Finally, type 2 diabetes can be prevented. Losing just 7% of your body weight and exercising moderately can reduce your risk by 58%. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. So our first order of business this morning is administrative in nature. It's the approval of the agenda. I trust everyone's had a chance to review the agenda today. If there are no objections, we'll consider the agenda approved as presented. Does anyone have any objections? If not, okay, the agenda is approved. Now we'll move on to approval of minutes. We have the minutes of our previous meetings before us for approval. Could I get a motion from a committee member to approve the minutes from our October 22nd Executive Committee meeting and our October 22nd executive session?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Motion by Mr. Goldman. Is there a second?
Second by Ms. Gideby.
Oh, hey, Stephanie. Thank you. Motion by Mr. Goldman, seconded by Ms. Gideby. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved. Now we have just one item on today's agenda, the board's annual ethics training. The board's code of ethics requires that each board member receive in-person ethics training annually, and today's session fulfills that requirement. It also gives board members the opportunity to ask any questions that they may have for our General Counsel, Patty Lee, and the authority's ethics officer, Phil Staub. I would also like to note that since these training sessions are required of all board members, we are joined by the board's alternate directors this morning. I'll now turn the floor over to Patty and Phil.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and board members. Yes, today I am joined by my colleague, Phil Staub, who is the board ethics officer, and we will provide the board's annual ethics training. If you have not done so already, it's a good idea to regularly review the ethics code throughout the year. The agenda for today, we will cover fiduciary duties, conflicts of interest, disclosures, personal liability and official immunity. And then at the end, we will go over a few scenarios with a hypothetical set of facts where we will apply certain provisions of the code. So to whom do board members owe their fiduciary duty? Both the WMATA Compact and the Board Code of Ethics provides that a board member owes his or her fiduciary duty to the authority and to its jurisdiction. So fiduciary duties are made up of 4 duties under the Board Code of Ethics: the duty of loyalty, duty of confidentiality, duty of care, and duty to avoid conflicts of interest. Duty of loyalty, that means to act in the best interest of WMATA or your jurisdiction in good faith, and to do so objectively and independently. Actions should not be in the interest of yourself or another person or another organization, but solely in the interest of the authority. Duty of confidentiality. The duty is to keep confidential all non-public information learned through your board service. For example, premature disclosure or disclosure of confidential information to third parties or to your jurisdiction could result in statutory violations, such as potentially violating privacy laws or loss of attorney-client privilege. Duty of care. This means to act with appropriate attention and to be fully apprised of all reasonably available information. So for example, attend board meetings if you are participating, review board materials before taking board action and before board meetings, ask questions, gather information to make an informed decision. Duty to avoid conflicts of interest. Avoid any action that would diminish the public's confidence in the integrity of the board or WMATA. For example, do not use your board position for favored treatment of any person or entity. Do not use your board position for personal gain. Do not solicit or accept gifts, money, or other things of value in connection with your service as a board member. What is a conflict of interest? A conflict of interest is when a board member's ability to perform his or her duties fairly and objectively would be compromised. Conflicts of interest include, but are not limited to, when a board member has a substantial interest or duty in an interested party. So for example, a board member's partner works for a WMATA vendor. That would be considered a conflict of interest. So how do we resolve conflicts of interest? So the Ethics Code provides two ways to resolve conflicts of interest. You can do so by recusal or by declaration. So in a recusal, the conflicted board member would not participate or act in the relevant matter. The second way is a declaration. If the board member believes he or she can act fairly and objectively in spite of the conflict, he or she may seek a declaration. The board member would consult with the board ethics officer, Mr. Staub, and if Mr. Staub concurs, the board member would seek approval from the board. If the board votes to approve the declaration, then the board member may participate in the action. Disclosures. The Ethics Code requires board members to report their interest, such as employment, other board memberships, or ownership interest annually. The Ethics Code also has requires a continuing obligation to disclose. So throughout the year, if your interests change or you have new interest, then you will need to update your disclosure statement. Board members also have an obligation to report any gifts received from a prohibited source. A prohibited source is either an interested party, such as a WMATA vendor, or a person or entity giving you the gift solely because you are a board member. No personal liability and official immunity. Board members are not personally liable for breaches of contracts or tort. The WMATA Compact clearly provides the exclusive remedy for any allegations of breach of tort or contract is a suit against the authority. Board members enjoy official immunity for his or her discretionary conduct within the scope of his or her official duties. Now, this immunity may be lost if the board member acts clearly or objectively outside the scope of his or her official duty. Okay, are there any questions before we move into some of these hypothetical facts? Okay. So we will cover 3 scenarios. And I will turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Staub, to take you through the scenarios.
Good morning. So in this first scenario, the board member has an adult daughter who is not dependent and is financially independent. And the daughter has an ownership interest in a WMATA vendor. And the question is, do I need to recuse myself if the board is considering a matter that would affect the interests of the vendor? And the simple answer under these facts, yes. A little bit of a trick question because we established that the daughter is not a household member, but it is still a conflict because it affects the ability to perform duties fairly and objectively.
Okay, any questions? Why don't we vary the scenario a little bit? What if the daughter is an employee of the vendor and not an owner? Would you still need to recuse yourself?
I think you may not need to recuse yourself because the daughter's interest in the vendor is more attenuated. The board member should report that the daughter is an employee and should consult with the ethics officer on whether he or she can pursue a declaration in lieu of recusal.
Phil, it's Mike Goldman. What is an ownership interest? Is an ownership interest a minimal ownership in publicly traded stock? Does it require some percentage of stock ownership to be considered an ownership interest? Could you just expound upon that a little more detail?
Excellent question. Yeah, certainly an ownership interest could be like being a partner. The ownership interest could be, as you were suggesting, being a shareholder. To be the Code of Ethics does have thresholds of at least $10,000 or 3% of the business's gross income of the current or preceding fiscal year, whichever is greater.
Phil, it's Walter Alcorn. I have a follow-up question on that. So what about my daughter's 401k, and it happens to have ownership of the company greater than $10,000?
Right. So the code states that those sort of widely held and diverse investments are not considered as substantial interests or duties.
Thank you.
So if there's no other questions, I'll move on to the second scenario. Something that board members commonly are faced with. So an evening after the APTA conference, a company, which is not an interested party, hosts a cocktail hour and panel discussion about transit in the post-COVID era. The cocktail hour is open to all APTA invitees. Question is, can you attend and take part in the snacks and drinks? And the answer is yes, you can. I know the board members have been hoping for me to finally say yes to something. So in this scenario, the company is not a prohibited source, so that you can accept. And because it's not a gift from a prohibited source, you also don't need to report in this scenario. Any questions? Okay, our final scenario is the board member works for a firm that provides professional services to dozens of businesses. And the question is, does the board member have any reporting obligations under the Code of Ethics? Yes. The board member, first of all, ought to report employment with the business. That is one type of interest that the board members are required to report. The board member should also report any of the clients who are interested parties of Metro. And finally, the board member should recuse or make a declaration in lieu of disclosure for any matter coming before the board that affects client interests. That recuse, I'm counting the recusal or declaration as a type of reporting in that instance. I'll pause just in case there are questions about this scenario. Hearing none.
Actually, Phil, it's
Yes, sir.
Walter Alcorn again. I don't know if you're going to hit this, but instead of a firm, a trade association that has, hundreds or thousands of members, how about that?
In that instance, it's not in employment. So you would look to whether there's a different type of substantial interest or duty. So if the board member for WMATA is also a board member of the trade association, that's a different type of substantial interest and duty. You'd want to report that. And then I would fall back on consult with your friendly ethics officer to determine whether you need to report the individual members, because that is one of those it depends questions. So we'd have to look at the particular facts and situation that the board member is facing.
Okay, thank you.
Bill, I have a question. In any of the scenarios, is there a dollar threshold related to any of this?
Well, there was in the first scenario, I don't mean to be repetitious, but there was a dollar threshold in terms of ownership interest. In the gift
Yeah, but
scenario,
what I'm asking is it
I'm sorry.
$25 or is it $250,000? Is there an actual dollar amount that is a minimum in any of these scenarios?
Yes, in the first scenario, the ownership interest needs to be at least $10,000 or 3% of the business's gross income, whichever is greater. In the second scenario, had ABC been an interested party or a prohibited source, better said, there could be a dollar limit that comes into place. One of the gift exceptions is $25 or less. In the third scenario, there is no dollar threshold comes to mind. The professional services is any sort of professional services being provided. Now, whether the firm clients are actually interested parties, that could be a question, but not so much affected by dollar. Again, not really affected by dollar limits. It's more doing or seeking business with the authority or one of those factors.
Thank you for those clarifications. So is that it, Phil? Or I think you had one.
That's it on the scenarios, and I'll turn it back to Patty Lee.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I thank the board members for your attention. And again, I encourage board members to regularly review the Code of Ethics. And Phil and I are here to provide advice and counsel and guidance. So please, call us or contact us if you have any questions. And as always, disclose, disclose, disclose. The more you disclose, the more we'll be able to assist you to the extent any conflict arises. Okay, well, thank you very much. And so the board has completed its annual board ethics training.
Thank you, Patty. Thank you, Patty and Phil, for that. And Patty, I think the last point you made is a very good one. If anyone has any question at all, to please, reach out to Phil and ask that question. He's always readily available to help folks if they should have any questions. And again, as Patty said, it's better to err on the be very conservative or very cautious on that and just err on the side of good ethics. So appreciate that. Thank you very much. So with that, that is the end of our meeting. And now I'd like to adjourn the meeting and request an executive session in accordance with the bylaws. I, Paul Smedberg, request that the Board of Directors convene an executive session to discuss the following matters pursuant to Article 2, Paragraph 9, subsections A, budgetary matters that may affect legal positions, WMATA contracts, or sensitive relationships with jurisdictions or the federal government, and D, contractual or other matters involving proprietary concerns or the investment of public funds where discussion in public would adversely affect the financial interest of WMATA. I move approval. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Seconded by Mr. Goldman. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Thank you very much. We'll convene in an executive session shortly. Thank you.